In discussions on whether or not there is a God, something that you might hear quite often is God of the gaps, or personal incredulity. Now, these two arguments are fallacies. It's basically God of the gaps saying, we don't know, therefore it must be a God, it must be something supernatural. Science can't explain something. This, according to science, shouldn't work the way it did, but it does or did, so that just can't work, therefore it must be God. And then personal incredulity is more, I don't understand, therefore God. Like, we have good evidence for evolution, but somebody can say, I don't know how that works, therefore it has to be a God. It's more of a personal, it's a I don't understand versus a we don't understand, but the same basic concept. And the reason these types of arguments don't work is because, for starters, they just kind of don't make sense. It's we don't know how this works. We don't understand it. It can't work this way. Therefore, I know the answer. Therefore, it has to be this answer that I've come up with. And especially, it gets worse the more specific you get. Like, if you want to say, we don't know how the universe got here, therefore it must be a God, it'd be better for you to stick with a broad definition of a God or a creator. Because once you get into specifics, it gets even more ridiculous. Like, it's my God specifically out of all these gods from my book specifically that has these rules of how to live your life. It's just a lot more heavy lifting, especially because we can't even prove that there is a God or a creator, let alone, all this other stuff about it that we can't really prove. So the problem here is, like, how did the universe get here? How did this all happen? Is we don't know. And when you have explanations that don't have actual evidence, like a God, you can't just plug that in. Because I could say that the universe was pooped out by a giant rainbow space cat during the intergalactic laser wars of Stardate E370 in hopes that we would become the next prime species rising out of the ashes of a war-torn multiverse. My space cat has about as much credibility and evidence for it as a God, or the idea of a God, or we could say universe creating pixies, or we can plug in whatever. So it just doesn't, we can't just use the gaps to then say, therefore it must be my thing. We need evidence for our thing. We need to prove that our thing exists, prove that it can do the things we're saying, and prove that it did do. And we haven't done anything like that for a God. So it's you're trying to fill a hole, you're trying to fix a hole in the wall. You need mud and paint and stuff. You're trying to use imagination. Like, you don't have the mud, you don't have the paint, you don't have the tools, you don't have any actual evidence to suggest that it was a creator, was a God. You're just using this idea to fill the holes, and it just doesn't make sense. Especially when you consider the fact that this line of thinking has failed us many times throughout human history, because throughout human history, humans have used supernatural explanations to explain a variety of natural phenomenon. Insect swarms, diseases, natural disasters, solar eclipses, the sun rising and setting, seasons changing. All of these things used to have supernatural explanations, and it used to have a variety of supernatural explanations depending on the culture, religion, society, whatever else have you. And it's no blame on the people of the time. People 10,000 years ago didn't have modern science. So yeah, the sun, that thing that provides light, is going dark. I don't know what's happening. I'm scared. Maybe it's dark spirits. They didn't really have a better explanation, so you can't really fault them for that. The problem is, we now have better, credible, evidence-based scientific explanations for these things, natural explanations for these phenomenon. So it wasn't supernatural. And we've used that with more than just the stuff that I've listed. So this line of thinking has failed us. And that's not to say that every single gap in our knowledge is one day going to be filled by science. I hope so, but maybe it won't. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Maybe we'll never know. Maybe it's something supernatural. I don't know, but we haven't gotten there. And it's not a matter of just like, no, it can't be something supernatural. It's just, we've used this just plugging it into the gaps for so long, and it's failed us. You need actual credible evidence for your God, for your creator, for your supernatural idea before we can bring it properly to the table as an actual explanation. And even when we do have explanations, you cannot just then say, well, God did it. Because theists, for a long time, creationists specifically, have been largely against evolution. And in more recent times, a lot of theists are accepting evolution a little bit more because there's just a lot of evidence for it. It's becoming harder and harder to deny. But then they just say, okay, yeah, evolution is true, but God did it. That's what I call the God sticker, and it doesn't work. If an idea works without a God, you don't need the God sticker. And if you still can't prove that your God exists, can do the things you're saying, and did do the things you're saying, it's just as bad as God of the gaps. So we're going to keep looking. Or I won't. I'm not a scientist, but somebody will. And we'll keep thinking about it and having these discussions. But we can't just say, I don't know, therefore it has to be something. Or even if the best scientists can't explain something, even if it's something that seems to completely contradict the laws of nature, if there's just no explanation, it shouldn't work that way. Yeah, I can agree, it's weird, it shouldn't work that way. I will follow you every single step of the way until you try to fill that gap with something we don't actually have reason to believe. That's where you lose me, and that's where it becomes a fallacy, and that's where you just don't have an argument.